Ashidale Genla.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's a good tele.
So we're ready.
Domba Tungurege.
Ah. Well, yeah.
Good morning, and Tashidale Genla. So happy to see you again. And Katrina, thank you so much for your translations. Welcome to anyone watching online. And we'll begin with some prayers and offering body, speech, and mind.
To the teacher and Tao, transcendent destroyer, one thus gone, full destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one gone to bliss, nor the world's supreme guide of beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods and humans, to you, the Buddha and Tao, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, our prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paid 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With pure bodies, form supremely fine, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain. Fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner the best, supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not incomparable, wise one, to you I bow. Great, compassionate, protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field, endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame, a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all-seeing, subdue the 4 faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, 4 lands, sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Rana Bandalakam Niryatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
딕성 겐나.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that is correct. But then the order of Umaju Begapsura. Kanzi Rawan Jujin Tunabas. Kanzi Rawan Jujin Tunaba. Getting Dirita and Zimbar Machina. Yansar Lunga Shawan Jujuro, Telechine Kangalunga Juru. Shesum Batarsira.
Recording in progress.
Pachere. This one.
딕성.
Oh yeah. Kanzi Rawan Jujin. Bangaranzu Tanda. Kiwa Chimade. Nesung of Tindele. Dundu of Tindel Pandrotan. Sadami. Ten Kebarche. Chuchu ten Tanda Nashin Le Laba. Tanda Mesindile Laba, Pa Yong Tandalia. Noa. Tapshi Kariching in the Soso Ramayo Resungora. Kanzi Raman Jujins. Ramage Kone Judy Tugel Ramayo. Nesung Kichi Kuka. Miki Wachute. Roa. Oh, Jenny, Tindo Kewachula Sobatumne. And a lot of military Kusagin, so the Rawan connected Jube Tunji Kangachanga Sungora, Kanzi Rawan Juch, Tune Basir. So the Timbe Yuna never. Rama Yore, Nyenge, Shege Yore, Nyenge Yore, Rama Yore, Karinako, Susu Magenta Armata Chenako, Yudan Lungbata Yen, which on the Madia Kayomara, Sangmatunji Santa Yona. Kakse chenge suyo marwa, o indi, kanzi rawan juji tuyne baas. Tipe ke chambare. Ketin dir daan zimbar meche na, ta dare, dinde kukab sangbu yebe kapdiliya, sosu maa ngesun la maa tunga, tandu raba tindir paa maa je. Ketin dir daan zimbar su maa yangdu maa malunga, ngonde komba ya toya koba, kiawa sangbu. Maa memba tindir maa madwa shira. Ti maa masar che, yangdu maa malunga che. Tandula sobe kene ngemba namsu maa yangdu malunga che. Ene ya lada mii koba, chuchu be ten kebar che tandula lakbar chipa, kiye te susu lakbar sigura. O ti yebe kabla susu ya, yangdu lunga ten zihini ya kemni ya, kondu lada mii kiawa tobe ya chi chi matum na sigura. Ketin dir daan zimbar meche nasa, maa yangsa le lunga tili ya kem matum nasa, zihin sibi kiaba sira, yaan zim matum nasa. Zimbar meche nasa, ketin dir daan zimbar meche na. Ketin rawa juji tuyne go, ketin dir daan zimbar meche. Yangsa le lunga, shawan juji ruwa tele chine kange lunga jo. Ngeson le maa tundu rabchi keche langbu chi rabchi kewe yina sira. Topdo chimbu shidari de, ta kake che yo mara, samlo koya etan. Che kake yo mara, o tindi, yasan luya shawan jojowa tele chine kange longa di, ta sui longa yore ya, kiamge sui yore, ta kake yo mara, soso lakwa yidu soso che yo mara, ta tindi ta kake che yo mara sa, tele chine kange longa yoru se, o tichi longa ya.
So, as Chandrakirti has stated in his entry to the middle way, at this time where we have a freedom and all of the kind of conducive conditions, if we don't take advantage of that, like take hold of that, then falling into the abyss of a situation where we have no control, how will we possibly get ourselves out of that again? So right now, if we are to take advantage of this situation, in our next life, we can secure a good rebirth, a basis upon which we can continue to practice the Dharma as a human or a god, superior maybe even to the life or situation that we have right now. And so in order to do that, we need to stop the kind of causes that would lead us to a lower rebirth, abandon the 10 non-virtues, and we have the freedom to be able to do that. We have the freedom to engage in ethics wherein we abandon the 10 non-virtues, and on the other hand, engage in the 10 virtuous 10 virtues. virtues. And so right now we have all of the kind of autonomy, and not only that, the sort of conducive circumstances to be able to practice the Dharma. There are people that can explain to you. You are able to listen to this. No one is stopping you or preventing you from doing that. You don't have a kind of situation in your country or environment where you're absolutely unable to practice the Dharma. You're allowed to do this. And so if right now, where we have all of the kind of autonomy and freedom to be able to create the causes for a good rebirth in the future, if instead we don't do that, we allow ourselves to fall into the condition of a lower rebirth, then how will we possibly get ourselves out again? Instead, we should make sure that we create the causes for taking birth as a human or a god, a special kind of basis to be able to accomplish the Dharma. And if we're not able to do that, if we come under the control of being born in the lower realms, like even if we are born as like an elephant or a bull, some kind of creature that has great physical strength, we don't have the capacity to be able to like extricate ourselves, pull ourselves up out of that situation. And so how could you possibly get out once you have fallen into that kind of a negative rebirth?
Oh yeah. Tien du nang ba ge rawa. Oh, tene tawa na shi chena. Gyula tene drebu kye ku yo ra. Oh, tien du so so maung ba la. Dewa da tungwe yong ya ge. Dewa da tungwe yong ya ge. Gyu ti so so che wu ma do shenda che ge. Jeme to shen shenda che ge ni. Rangi dewa da tungwe che che ge. Kyewa sangye da tindil pa tanya yo ma ra. So so ge maung ba. Titu ti so so le ge ong ge yong gu ma do. Shenda so so kar che na ma che na. Shenda che ge. Wang che che ne kyewa sangye da kangal pa. Tanya che yo na ti nyenga chimburwa. Ti indi ko le kyum de sigira. Soso le sambu chene, soso debu sambu yungude. Soso le ngemba chene, soso debu ngemba yungude ese. Soso so de ese ora. Maranju shenda jili rawara che te chipu nora de sunga ora. Soso labo yores. O ti indi kasura. Mahumba de dewa tonge kante chi yung mayo de. So de soso ra legira. O ti indi ko kyudi pangayata. Rawa kyu ngenpa de pangayata sambu di truwe de rawa yuwe kaptila pe sabso che uris. Di pe kesi mura nga ranzu di nawa tanga mara. De mikiwa chu tsuyin chama chikzu nga che tezo namgyu ngune che ne chizo nan rudu yungu ara. Geshe shedu yungu ara, samlutandi yungu ara, ligi kunju to tidu sabso che kora. Tidu nawa keyo mara namgyu nashi chikpa se. Rawa. Ane a shenda chik samluta tin to kora. Shiti tanta tira, peke shishide, kibu chungu inada, kibu ring inada, kibu chenbu inada, di shi songne. Shenla tsawa pangayada, pemba truba nibudu ya, niwa cheru tangde, ni ya ndo yada mato, di shi ma son dosa yo marwa. Sa ti peke chimbure. Kyo chima de lada mila soba, kyo wa sangbuchi topna, ani ya kone kondo dhoya rawa yo ra. Di mena ani, ma talo che ma chini ane turu dhraya shik so lepki ora. O ti hindi, ti pe sepso che ura. Ti kibu chungu dring chenpo sumga ke shi tingi ora. Shi di, ba, ma chan rabde. Yigidi ma suna epe siti lepki ora, shi ne. Ti abu chi lepna ane tangma kanga yongya shi ora. Ti meni yo maro. Ti nga zu nawa tang mara, ti kaya mara sam, ti memba si shinda chi ne. Thombo rishna namsa thobja kucha si droya nre samla kogda. Ti yo na to yapure de ti yo marwa. O ti chudi mani debu yo to yo marwa. O ti indi ti pe keshan bu se kudwa. Nga namjine ho ti mabu shegi yo. Chidang nangba chu she du za kibu chungu dan jingda chenpu di shi la song ni ti chasang ara chi yo ba che ni she ku yo ra. O yo ti chilan ya.
So, here, according to the Buddhist view, all results come about in dependence upon their causes. And so, too, our own happiness and suffering come from their respective causes of virtue and non-virtue. It's not as though some unconnected other gives them to us, bestows them upon us, or they come about without any sort of cause, but rather it's due to your own individual karma that you create your future suffering and happiness. No other being sort of sends you to a good rebirth or puts you in a bad rebirth, but rather it is your own good karma that will lead to a good result and your own bad karma that will create a suffering result. And so that's a mistake to sort of put a trust in another or relinquish the responsibility that we have. It is dependent upon you. And so it is necessary to really hold as a foundation this practice of abandoning harm, as in abandoning the bad kinds of causes that will lead to bad results, and protecting the kind of good causes, benefiting others that will lead to good results. And so often we don't pay attention to this. We sort of just don't think it's important. But it is important. This comes about when we go out in society and we interact with others. It comes in the way that we speak to them, the way that we treat them in our conduct and so forth. And so if we think that our practice is not that, but it's something other, something besides that, then really we are missing the point. This is the most important kind of foundation for any level of practitioner, of being of small scope, middling scope, or great scope. This is the foundation. Abandoning harm and benefiting others is the basic practice, the foundation upon which all others are built. And if we engage in that, if we hold that as a basis, then we have the hope of improving and developing. And so we need to be very careful with respect to this. It's like the kind of basic thing that we need to be able to do everything else. In the same way, to be able to read and know language, we need to know the alphabet, the ABCs. And so sometimes we think we can just jump to higher practices as if we don't need that kind of foundation. But without the cause, there is no result. And so we have to take accountability. We need to hold as important the kinds of actions in which we engage, recognizing that that is what determines the results we experience.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, tindu ka sura. Ti shanli up in a sochuba. Machin balimba loyim sadrina. Ti pankwe de karisna ti shanla. Tungeji gres ti pangwara. So shanla ya tungejen digmare samje. Zawa chi shisun yungwara. Oh, shanyi sochu machin balimba loyim sobsina. Shandala nigres shanla kange tegres samgwara. Tindi shanla tsawa pangba. Shen tunge da trendu samlu chigi. Tunge chone digi mara sambe tsawa chigi shi sungudwa. That's ko tsawa de yung gore. Pemba to so kyobya tanga chik karsura chimba tanga da tezu chambe sam de yung gora. Kol ya dewa da trendu samba chigi. Pento na kol dewa yung gore yabu kange yung mara sam. Chamba da tsawa li shi sungi shegi wara. Ti indi ko pocho de li nigiri samsa. Bodhicitta tawa jigre samsa tende samle thona yongdi chambada tsawani de yongudwa. Tende nambe che kanga de su tuna shenla tsawa pangbada pemba truvani tu chamjingi le tu dore. Kange de seya si ta deba de ya toya thona nina de ndu songudwa. Tende tik de kashimbude ya.
So therefore, doing actions like killing others, stealing from them, engaging in sexual misconduct, these are things that are avoided because we recognize that they create suffering for others. It's not okay because that brings about the suffering for others. And so this is really, this idea of non-harm is based on a kind of compassion, of instead wishing to alleviate the suffering from others. And so any sort of violence or harm that we inflict upon others, when we see that that brings about their suffering, we avoid that based upon that understanding. And this is really the grounding in compassion or love. And so too, benefiting others is about bringing about their happiness. This is the attitude of love, wishing for others to have happiness. And so compassion and love is really the basis of all of the Buddha Dharma. All of the Buddha Dharma can be contained within these two: love and compassion, non-harm, and the wish to benefit.
Oh yeah. Oh, ti indu ka sura. Tatilia pech chana sungi wada tila. Pena tanda susu yansa lo ala manjimba cheche. Tandu rabchil maa kebe richi ina rawa tandu rabchi. Maa kebe ina. Ene te karishara sina. Mi pao chik. Mi pao. Rawa. Mi pao chik. Susu timbe yuna neba. Karichena susu mendeba se. Deva tuwe karichena ko tingin kanga yenyin wada waransa. Kuyu kanga randa timba yungechi sigara. Tinde kaptila miti susu kange siya de pa se. Deva tuwe de tupche tingin chazan yora. Tichene middle power till Kangachia or Esgora. Titu Majena, the me power tea. That's also power Nasitira, Miss Tanda Samlutan Shingiri, Shira Yora, Kanga Yora, Cheniche to Eshida. That in midi, Timajeviche, Tundra Dabsil Kesona, Longin Dabsil Kesona, Roya Kesona. Ni mi power de two damje, Gangba like two dam, Lumba Tongba Chili Yushabana Shire. Then go that get Yomara. Timbe yuna ne mara kuyu sama ye sama soso timbe yoma soso damja da ta ge ge yo yinju midi nge me midi re de ta ko ne dan de ko tinde cha do ta du res ke sna ta ge ge yo mara sheba koran de mi lu le tembe sheba sebo lang dur je tum ge de shanda chinal te ta koran de timba sa ya tum re de ma to shi to sam ko ma tum ge cha so ro ta ge ge ne ba me ba cha res wo tin na shi de se tanda manduwa chawures, tanda peke chimpures, roa, o tichene, nebardo kiwa chimate, tanda kiwa le laksi kena. Ane rewa kone kondo peya ke roa chawura. Tanda yobate ngemate ke yakura chen, tanda milu top chik, tempata che chik, langto che chunge skera. Tate tanda ya taru mata che, turu tanda ma drona ane pe nyega roa. Kisa pa kone kondo ya. Yema de yaku chen tanda ti chungre, tile jan laga tari chen ti tama ti chawra. Ti mena, piche na chi sungre, kiawa nga me katingi, ra, kiawa nga ma de le yaku saani katingi, tanda ane milu ren chen ti yaku tawre ese. Tade genlo rumbuche, ta genlo chara, ta chita mi kanga chigwara, genlo da kilo mata kanga ina, chita mi nera. Tade milu ren chen tongde ki, ya tashi tindu suyi na, chima nga yang la madung aasara. Tate kilo rumbuche, chima yang la madung shisara. Sa ko nga mada yaku chani, ti kumshi di yaru yaru staya tundara. O ti mea che ma turu tana, nga mai katingi yaku chitore. Tati yaku te yaku pechi ma che che, tuku chol pechi che na, susu susu yang la madung gishara. O tindi maya wa che ure sungda. O ti sungda ka sura. Nye bado nye songi tungele kiamne lada mi chudrube, ten kebar shi tobar che. Tenya rang nye songi tungele tawa tsa mayimba, koye tungele tawa, tile samlu che toru china. O midal hala kena ya, tungeji rang shin che che re sam. Rang la rangwa meba pungpun dolen che kuwa, te shinje kowa kor shinje tile tunge mato ke yonya me sam. Tenya yabu mendo san, tene tarwa tomde, kowa le tarwa tomde rwa. O tenya rang chi busa mayimba, sendi pame tsumbe, semje sama rangdan rwa yunge, rangla cheshu sendi la kari yunne, rwa pama dan, nyendre dan, chigi, choku dan, chomu da kari yunne, tina shimba yuge semje che me sam, kichi pyo na ngoma shimba mato, di ngala ngema kati shimburin, di marisi, nga zuge kichi pyo na ngoma shimba mato, shenche, sotiya yo mato, o tindi semje tamje, pemba trup tunge, kuya dungele chawa che tunge, kyan kunse yunde kunde ji kansa shin gyura chaku, tanda ngala neba mendu, tanga neba tinde yungengi, kyan kunse yunde kunde ji sanje ji koban ji toba chagi yinsam. Teye che doon tanda na chimba tsudin soba samde karukumna, shirab ji paru do chimba gyur gyur ji, sanje koban toba gyur gyur tinde samgo ra. Teye kaya shimbura, kasha samlu tiyungudu, nangba ka chode, mahomba sang kaya sona, ane sheba chichigin siyo res. Tanda kaya chago maris. Tanda kaya chago nga. Mahomba sang kaya sonas. Ki marwa sang kaya sona. Sang kaya ku yes, te tanda na chimba, tsudin soba, samde lobya te, sang kaya ji koban tobe gyule kyuchi si, yar kaya tanga ti samlu singu yora. Mato ti ya kone kondo pene, ane tardu tende jingyura chigin sam yora. Kaka kanga ABCD lamge tege, nga pe chiso shepchi shunga sinamido, soso nangmi sinamido, rangi kibayin tichido, bat lobzon tarshimba tamba chingin sido, tena sonam chayamado tanda nigo yo marwa, ti tanda tanda ne chana ABCD ne yadrugi samgyo ra, o tinda shi samrido, o ti indi, o te dabi kibu chungu dan ringda chimbi samba rimbi chana, sanje ji koban toba cha, te chido ni chunyangi yo sam, toba cha, samlo dan, 야내도 kumdi shigin sam chu samba shusha, o din digre.
So here, applying an example to this, like if we were to fall into an abyss, not taking advantage of this human life that we have right now, and we were to be born as like an animal, it's sort of like a sort of a hero, a strong man who has all of the power and capacity, is surrounded by all of the kinds of conducive conditions to be able to be successful, to accomplish all of their goals, their happiness, to be able to remove their suffering completely. But rather than taking advantage of that situation, if they are bound up, their hands and legs bound, and they are thrown into an environment that's completely isolated, where they have none of those kinds of conducive circumstances, they wouldn't even be able to like feed themselves. They wouldn't be able to take care of themselves. They had that perfect kind of condition before. And so too, our human rebirth, we have this kind of human intellect. We have the ability to distinguish between what we should adopt and what we should abandon. And so we should ensure that in the future, we definitely have this kind of rebirth, if not one even better than this, in order to have some hope of improving, continuing to improve more and more and more. And so here we have right now this human rebirth, wherein not only is it a human birth with the kind of capacity to understand, but we have met with the teachings. We have the ability to put them into practice, all of the kinds of conditions for that. And so without that, what would we be able to accomplish? And so as it's there's a kind of saying that says it's due to the kindness of the past, like the good causes that we created in the past, that we got such a precious human rebirth. And here in this verse, it actually says like a body as a monk. And so we shouldn't throw this out into the abyss, but rather should increase our habituation to the good, to the virtue. We should make an effort such that we ensure we are not going to fall into the lower realms, but make sure that we get a rebirth as a human or a god, and be able to ensure that we can continue to practice, continue to develop, and increasing our motivation even just beyond ensuring a good rebirth in the future, reflecting that all of samsara is in the nature of suffering, uncontrollably having to take up and cast off these aggregates due to the power of karma and our afflictions is something that we want to get out of. We want to be liberated from that state. But it's not just us who is in that kind of situation, but rather all of the beings that have shown us great kindness, like our mother, father, friends, and loved ones of this life. So too, every single sentient being has acted in that capacity, has been our dear mother, father, friend, family member. But it's only due to our not recognizing that because of the fact that we have moved rebirths, we have switched rebirths, but we should be concerned with their well-being as well. And so recognizing that, wishing to then be able to be of maximum benefit to others and be able to alleviate them from their suffering, we see that, well, we're not in a state where we are really able to be of benefit to them. And so in order to be able to benefit sentient beings most fully, to be able to alleviate their suffering, we give rise to this thought, may I myself become a being who has eliminated all faults, who has developed all good qualities, and thereby has the capacity to do so. And for that purpose, I'm going to engage in listening to the teachings, contemplating them, meditating on them. I'm going to engage in the practices of generosity, ethical conduct, patience, and so forth, developing the perfection of wisdom in order to be able to achieve that goal of Buddhahood. But we also shouldn't have this thought of like, oh yes, when I get to that state of Buddhahood, well, then I'm going to do things that are of benefit to others. I'm going to be able to do so much. While we are creating those causes, we are also benefiting others. We are doing things toward that purpose while we are striving to be able to bring those kinds of qualities to their culmination. And so, like some might think like, oh, while I'm studying, like while I'm learning to read and learning all these different topics, then eventually I'm going to get to this point where I'm able to be of great benefit to society. Well, we should recognize that along the way we are doing benefit. And so here we should not think that right now we have no ability to benefit others, but in striving for that goal, for that state in which we have the kind of maximum ability, we are working to bring those sorts of trainings to their culmination. And so here, with that kind of recognition of the importance of training the mind in those contemplations of the being of small scope, middling scope, and great scope, we should think, I'm going to hear and contemplate this Dharma, meditate on it, in order to be able to become a fully enlightened Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. And along the way, I'm going to do as much benefit as I can, reduce my harm completely. And so in this way, we should set a motivation for listening to the teachings.
Oh yeah. Dāngā dzū dēlēp te yobā kāsara. Ngō chi tōng la shīsē shidwa. Nipa ngō chi tōng la shīsē. Tā tēli ya. Wāng jī kēpara chēn tō tōwa āsē. Tā ndi kēpo la tamki warwa. Ndi kēpo liya kumbu lūdru ki chēndā kēpo liya labcha kēpo warwa. O tī ndi sāngkō lēga chēngē lēchī pasana wāng jū chēngē tō tō yākbu tēndē tsū dām liya kōkō rēs tō rūru sōgō rēs ē tāndā rē. Wāng jī kēpara chēn tō tōwa tāng stāmburwa. Ani rāngi tsawa tāng dēmbar chawa. Wāng jū chēngē tō tō mī yākbu tēndē tsū dām gu rēs ē kebarchen, kansa kebarchen tende, jumbo yabu tende, uaba tende dambu ese. Ene, rangi tsewa dan, demba, soso rangi, lungpe na timge chinge da kanga lipa chamzi dan demba che, changma tungwe da trendu da tsewa dan demba che kure, kebu kurang sunga wara. Chen dan she, chen je yang, jawari chawa da. Tene tsamba tozo ina, da wane pancha yungura, tsumba tozo ina ku takbar si meze koran tsun la shutin rishi kiwa mara sigora tsun ne pa tanguru tangi chogore ese mi kyobo tende ina lakbar to kyobo nang mi kange yoba ina yogba nima mambu ka kiwa mara tsun ne pa tanguru ese gora shanda su dagi chene ti chogore mada kol ke kaan na rab che meze koran tsun la shutin rishi kiwa mara sigora tsun dangshe tsun je che yang tawarja tsun la chukbe kabla tsun bala nye ta tang mambu chigda tsun bala nye ta tang ne kala matre che tine kaa tu che ne kobe she chu ne tiri chi kyo ma re tsun la chukbe che ya kebe che ya tun yin tu su sa ya tong ya tang chik tsangma tati ya ucho tati o ne yung guda o tine ne ta tangbu tere dwa o cha wa tang she ne ka re le rung tu cha me ne na ta ko tsumba kashe yang lungbe na la pe nyota sabu che ko tsane lapche rab kepche kache che na ko yabu pen nyota songeri chigido na lungbe shenda lo pa pi sha ko lungbe shenda ko jawa menge den de te ba pen dil ma de tsu yong cho ma de se lungbe shenda sha sha na ko yang sa ba ro chi chi ni ma na shi melenda ba ke ta tu yong ma ro o tin de che ne subject kashe to wa ta tin na tambu de da kansa kebar chen doa asetere ruru sade ya tejilona.
So here we're actually going to be picking up from verse 329. I believe this might have been something we already did, but here this is the actual instructions in non-degeneration in terms of not letting the practices that have already been established degenerate. And there are 4 different topics that come under this. And the first is gathering those of special powers. Making oneself compassionate, and then the next 2 deal with being especially compassionate, especially to those who are wicked or those who are prisoners, those who have done wrong, and then showing that that is something that is reasonable or that is correct. And so here, when it comes to those who have been convicted of a crime or have done something that is wrong, you shouldn't sort of put them in prison for their entire life or treat them badly in prison, especially for those who are poor and for suffering. It's not appropriate to just imprison someone for the entirety of their lifetime. This is not something that one should do. And so too, although they are in prison, you shouldn't engage in things like beating them or depriving them of food, but rather where those who are imprisoned should have good conditions. They should have enough to eat. Their needs should be met. And then there are some cases where if you are unable to reform somebody, if you've given them lots of advice, tried to help them, tried to correct course, but they continue to act in a negative way, they should be expelled to another place, another sort of unconnected country, wherein maybe those new conditions will help for them to change their ways. So these will come in order as we go through.
야, 다 언제 개발전도 또 쇼로가데 니슈자고 레도 쇼로가 니슈자고 되래.
Claro.
야, 세배 겐신수도 세배 겐신 아니 리상와세. 신유다 대주 야부 대주 원규제 통계게 따도 야부 제 통계게 신유다 된게로와. 아니 냠용도 용게 냠지 겸바 용게지로. 리상부 용바. 라. 리상부스도 지단 미리를 연지를 붙여체 마부체 요르던 게리세라고 잠세리세 근데 가시 미리 마부티스기 오마레 단다디 미리 코치단 미리 내가 야부 챙겨게 진짜시시거라 아니 가르세라 리상와스라 아니 리베셰라세 티수 강가 야부 챙겨시고라 셰라 딜란 젬세 아니 랑도 추다시 개와다 딕바다 룸메루디 랑도 켈링게 스코레스기와라 딜루바스 어디 말에 밀렌데바시도 디롱고 말에 삼삼삼게 스코라 마도 소소 케메르시 테니 룸메 버틴데 셰지네 강에서위와라 딜란 젬세 아니 가르도 나신스 나로리아 툼부이 바스코 레지브 나로리아 tumbuyo kuara nangshin kare koba tongjurwa nangshin koba tongjurwa mangbo dado kyoji so oda tende shin yoge mangbo leje ba wongju chinge tu mangbo so ko res wara tururu sen dam go res wara ode koran deba de malo shin dido wangji 개발체 member 거나서 원규 챙게데 미 개발체 멤버들 거나니 강에 용담 무슨 그래서라 거나 제바 제어 발라 제바 마제바 제바 제 매어 같은 제바 첨부체 어떤 데 논두만 보용 그래서라 근데 마용하셔 그래서 야가서라 제바 제 매어 발야 제바 챙게 근데 전에 냠버 주래서 리파다 미릭바 가레 콜 제바 제고라 처럼 제라 릭바다 미릭바다 야보 신경스 거래서 세배 겐셰 어떤데 냠뇨 용게 겐셰 그러니까 겐셰에서 링에 닝라 템바 라고면 다 링에 바로 그 지단 미시가 녀바데 거라 텐데 멤버십 거래서라 닝라 템바 내가서 템바라 메조베 릭상와 다디그 릭상와세 네 지대기 루 릭바셰바 지대기 조다둘루 팀기 조다둘루 셰바시고서라 디글란 점바다 원제 남 디글란 점게 달도서 디글란 점바다 원제 남다 셰바 원제게 남편주의 tumbu용 게시고가라 뭐베 지시 조상게 시바 연제만 보셔 같이 생각했는데요 말아 팀비 자와제바 그왜 팀바 어때데 개발을 통화 요 따도 주지 어다 된데 원주 챙겨진데 따도 미상 못인데 그시에서 도다 야 디바도 실람나 마부 말람네 들어니 마부 깨치 채나 계란 주주질람
No. So here, this verse 329 reads, "May you always be accompanied by many advisors who are mature in knowledge, of good family, well-versed in public policy, afraid of misdeeds, not contentious, and able to see what should be done." So here it is saying that a king should select advisors who are mature in knowledge. Here it says sort of old, but that is referring to their having experience parents being well educated. And then where it says of good family, this isn't referring to like the kind of caste system where you have kingly and Brahmins and so forth, but rather that their family has a kind of good lineage in terms of their conduct. They are upstanding people. So it's not about a particular sort of caste, but rather that they come from a family that acts well, that has good conduct. And then they should be well versed in public policy, be afraid of misdeeds, as in be cautious with respect to misdeeds, not be contentious, work well or be collaborative with others, and able to see what should be done. So if one is to appoint advisors that don't have those qualities, they will do what is inappropriate and not do what is appropriate. And so too, it should be someone who has actually gained some kind of experience and thereby has a kind of a good understanding. And so too, come from a family with a good nature, have good knowledge of the ways of the world, and also be cautious with respect to non-virtuous actions. And so too, they should be someone that avoids kind of contention within working with others and instead be collaborative. And knowing the importance of acting ethically, they should see what is appropriate to do and what should be done.
Oh yeah, 다들 니바들에도 랑이 쩌와르 자와단 데마 소소 개부 코란데 쩌와단 데마 셔고레 셔고라 좀바이나 가리는 참말이야. 쩌와단 데마 셔고 텔레 코튼 자리 숨제 용구도 다 원에 반제 용구도 쩌웨 송아르 자와 시셔로 아니 딕 제발라시 딕바심 섭지 쟁게라 개발도 쩌와셔고레 학발도 쩌와셔고레 셔라 어디 제고베 규선시 돈자로 숨제니 셔도 다 당부대로 당부대 가려서는 쩌웨 송아르 자와셔야 되래 어디 쇼르가 숨지 받으래도 내 가르쳐도서는 체베 송다 대글라 소스라 다 체베 자야다 tin데 용구라 아니 대글라 소바고 셰셰타다 tin데 용구라 리바 교제 미키데스 리바 교제 미키데스 다 콜야 체베 숙심부 자야다 tin데 셰메르 미키데스 아니 니지 렘바르 기네네스 세외권에 그 가도 얘네 좀 만들고 요라 다그 규주를 당제 컨디션도 탑시 다그르마도 콜타냐 버쳐우르 코투자 시티데 삼는 만디사라 그러니까 소래 렉방 교제 미치데 미데 니지 렘바르 기네네 다도 제수 송어르스 세외도 내봐 니지 그 제외 송네네 그 컨디션 요르버지 땅에 탑신도 그 뜻다고 그래서 뜻다도 다던다 제외권에 장그래서 어디지렸나 제발로네 말로네 드메다 원진남게 노르기 체바다 잘하게 체바게다 전도 송하다 대과다 셰셰 땅에다 직도자 인이다 땅에 들으시오라 아니 르바체나 르바케게 미키도 어떤 데지죠 말이셔라 균인지 렘바리 균에네 슈나 동아다 다코베 땅에 예수자 전시라 마거르지 바 따로지 제트르 슈스나 그 네줄이 따기따기 제 강에 여베나 요반님아 싱아 두마도 마냐시티 챈달 따기따기 제 대체오래서 그다 어디 버질라나
So then next is making, again, this is the second topic, making oneself compassionate. And this has three topics within it that is sort of providing out of compassion or holding those who have done wrong with compassion and having special kind of compassion for those who have are wicked or who have done misdeeds, and then why that is logical or why that is right. So the first of these comes in verse 330. Even if they rightly fine, imprison, or corporally punish wrongdoers, you, being always moistened by compassion, should show kindness to those punished. So here, one in particular, as a king, should have compassion even for those who have done wrong. If they are sort of reprimanded, a punishment is inflicted, whether that is a kind of fine or whether they are imprisoned, even if it's a sort of corporal punishment, you should not lose your compassion. Rather than seeing this as a chance to sort of harm or inflict something upon someone who has done wrong, you should be thinking about how could you reform that person? How could you change that person? And as the king, you should always be compassionate. If someone requests for freedom from prison, you should examine the situation and always hold them with this kind of compassionate attitude.
Oh yeah. Dan nipa tsewe songwari chawa shidwa, di sholuka sumsochi tiredwa. Mise tikpa cheba yeshe, luchen tani tamche lawa she. Ane gyabu kyoji takbar yang, nyingji pensim kona kes. Mise tikpa cheba ne, pe tikpa tsab chenpo. Rwa, o tini pama seba la soba, ta tini tsab chenpo chenge tizu lan se wara. Mise tikpa cheba ye, luchen tani tamche lawa, ta ko tikpa tsab chen che sha se, nakpu che ta chi kolya, tukpu tanguri samse, tini samgyo, tele ya, lakbar tu tsawa che gure sambe. Tikpa cheba ye, luchen tani tamche lawa, gyabu kyoji takbar yang, nyingji pensim kona kes. O lakbar tu, kansa tizu ya, pa tulche ko sangpo soya tundal ya, nyingji lakbar tu kene, lakbar tu tsawa che gure samgyo wara, gyaba cha gure se. O tan dreba malo ne pechin dire tuwa, tsamme ba so se, tsamme ba se, pa seba, ma seba ta tindire, tsamme ki le se wara, shi chadu nge ba tu nge son dhokwe, shi ni tingi baru nge son ma chini tsamme nge le tindire, pa ma seba la soba kashe changi wara. Tsamme ba so, mi sebe tikba chebe, lu chen tani tamze la yang se ra, geba choje takbar ya nyingji pensim kona geba cha gure se, kota tsabchen resha sam lakbar tu kondu saya yo ma re se wara. ane yawarando nebe tamje dume ko yawarando ta mete tu jare sa le ne ta le fa ta ne tsawa yuksha de chora tende member she yawarando nebe sim namba tamje dume kese nesim namba tamje de ke ko ka de sabje na lakbar do ko pa yabu yoye tabshi che wore so da ya de chilona.
So then continuing into verse 331, which deals with how one should have special compassion for those who have committed especially egregious non-virtues. So here it says, King, out of compassion, you should always make your mind focused upon benefiting all beings, even those that have committed the most serious misdeeds. So even when someone has done something really egregious, such as killing their mother or father, doing those kinds of needs of immediate retribution, one should have a special compassion for them, in particular, actually trying to subdue or tame them, to reform them to being good. So those kinds of negativities of immediate retribution are those that are going to bring an immediate bad result of the birth in the lower realms. And so too, a king being especially compassionate should never give rise to anger toward them or feel like, oh, I'm just going to give up on them, cast them aside, they're not worth trying to reform. But rather, those in particular who have done such heinous negativities should be a special object of compassion, and you should try however much you are able to bring them toward the good, to reform them.
Oh yeah, that's super. They tell us what subject can get there. Lakbar to tsawa chego rese, they chego be kusendi chego they tell us it. They sholoka sumchi soni tiredo. Mise tikchen search lase. Tikpa mise ba chena pama soba soba tende chengetele segura. Kebar to ya ningchi kise. Lakbar do kola tsawa chego rese wara. Tangi nyamba teta nyi se. Tangi chimbu niji ne so. Ota tende sabji chengete. Tangi chimbu chanju sambatu lakbar do ko sewe ne re ma do ko lakbar do ko kondu saya ne ta. Tuku tangu ya ne ma re se wara. Oh, that did reba chibarise. Chame so misebe tikpe chengen to zula sigora. Tikchen pamaso baso chebalaya. Kebar do nyinji keko rese. Chögi tangi nyamba tetanese. Ko chö tangewa ra tetane. Geshe tangi chimbu nyinji ne pyudu chwangme. Ta chanju sambayi ne ko nyinji ne pyudu chwang. Lagbar du tubja kanyi ba chengetilo lagbar du tsawa cheko yora. 닝지 내 표도 샤세 닝지 공약이 내다 약속들에送거라 야 뒤지로나
So then next in verse 332, we have the reason why it is reasonable, why it is right for particularly bodhisattvas to have a kind of special compassion for those who have committed egregious acts. So you should particularly have compassion for those that have committed the serious negativity of murder. And though these ones who have ruined themselves are indeed worthy of great person's compassion. So those kinds of unbearable bad acts like killing one's mother or father, for those who really have great compassion, those who are great beings, the people who have committed such acts are really indeed worthy of that great compassion. So bodhisattvas, this is really sort of they should have the most compassion for that kind of being.
너야 들 아야 되게 가서 그 시계바 론스 장도한테 드바나 장이라 저는 내저죠 봐 시계발에서 파발라기 론스 장도 지다를 많이 개발도 빼놨어 라 아마데 시거라 많이 개발도 소수부 나저르스 나게도 야미 교들 하고 저시기라 단디 콩큐 아니었음 가르쳐였음 딜 하고도 심대시기라 야가르나 거다 나다 메시디두리 삼사 네버지네 코 나저 저저 두고 나게들 하고도 저시기래서라 집에 만에 개발도 내대 불러 동주로 와서 동해 망부여를 삼로 망당 그래서라 대신 장주 선배제 담반 밀을 하고도 장주 선배제 어디야 기부 담반 멤버 춘대 많이 봐 취미 이제 섭씨 붙인 게들 하고도 저기고 그래서라 어디지람나 롱디 장시도 야
So then, in the commentary, Gyaltsab quotes from Aryadeva's 400 verses, and here it says, just like how a mother, in particular, when her child is afflicted by a terrible illness, would feel particular compassion for them, so too a bodhisattva, one who is endowed with love, has a particular kind of special love for those who are unholy or those who act wrongly. So in the same way that a mother, if their child were really ill, really sick, in really poor kinds of conditions, they would have a particularly strong kind of compassion, wanting to help them rather than just disregarding that. So too, bodhisattvas, their love is particularly strong for those who act wrongly.
오야 다들 숨바 sabje 숨바 들리니 치기도 좀바이나 전에 땅고래 세거라 딱바를 세전전이 샤지오 말이세거라 전제 제 대화죠 전쟁이를 시기도 전에 봐 땅고래 세전지교 말이세라 아니 전에 예배치 않고 대화제제 야구 샤워를 듣고다죠 말이세다 니도 어다 니지 신남 샤가 봐 니마 찍삼 니마 시가 저번에 미강에 여번 남미다 직접 배교부 싶던데 연구라 근데 내고 니마 시간에 사드 전에 가지고 말해서 거라 그 전에 봐 다셔고 놈 냠주 전에 따와서 배 냠춘주 강에 연결된데네 또저 봐 랍자야 붙잡셔 전에 봐 다셔고 거라 근데 고향 규주체로요라 사만 남자 지리줘서 사만 시장냠다 많이 뱉어서 다 코로나 따기 제제 그 주어럽 되게 두가 메두가서 제제 안 따기 제 니마 주장한 다와르스 가르샤고 따기 제 땅고를 마도 배 세선시켜 말이서라 남자 지리줘서 다 뒤줄 따기 까지 가고도서 배 시라까 먹고 저셔고요라 가야 메트 메버죠 가 좀바 컨디션에 접시 컨디션에 전에 전에 줘야 매버 최선 제제 어떤데 멤버십고 그래서 배치를 메시코나 좀 주었는데 시죠 말이세요. 야 패진 되면도지 이상아 줄어서 버거지나 된대세요. 랑마고 내달 떡이지 뒤쪽으로 마도 유를 뭐 냐먹고 봐 쏘셔 그래서 야 뒤질라
So then next is how one should free prisoners and make them comfortable or give them decent circumstances. So here in verse 333, it reads, either every day or every 5 days, release the weakest prisoners and see that it is not the case that the remaining ones are never released as is appropriate. So here it's giving the advice to a king that there should be no life sentences wherein someone is imprisoned for the duration of their life. And so too, while they are within prison, they should be treated with good conditions, not like holding back food or not allowing them to have the proper kinds of conditions. And particularly those who are poor or in really struggling, difficult situations, you should try to release them as appropriate, having given them advice and kind of evaluate the situation to see, is it appropriate to allow them to go? Again, that's giving them hope for some kind of reform. And so mainly it is that one should release prisoners as appropriate, sort of looking at the situation, having given them advice, having helped them change their ways, and mainly that one should not restrain someone or keep them for the entirety of their life in prison.
Oh yeah. Tanga jutere da karsa. Chönen gaya tangse me. Di marare. Shologa samju soshidera.
Mare.
Chönen gaya tangse me. Tele tomba mimba kes ta. Ke ukora ge tomba kandishina. Pet tangse chönen loya samlo meba che tu ta to ko chönen chu to ku tangu samsa tere samlo kona. Ne tene madribre se tomba mimba te miki wele sa ure sora. Tomba tange wele. 그럴 거라서去年 가야 당시 매세 전에 당시 매버셔네 따도냐에 텔레 동바 멤버지 텔레데 동바 마임바 라라가 자주서 받아이나 고 동바 용구라 동바 멤버께서 아 동바 마이 텔레네 규미 제베 tik바서 어떤데 제베네 규미 제베네 tik바 마부사 그래서 대손자티 롱구마레서 somdo kyone zhengla dangshen meba tele, dade jikba yishe, odi chilamneya, lyure.
So, continuing under this point in verse 334, again, thinking of life sentences and holding in prison forever, this is not something that a king should do. It says here, from thinking that some should never be released, you develop behaviors and attitudes that contradict your precepts. From contradicting your precepts, you continually accumulate more negativity. So if you think that you'll always hold someone in prison, that really transgresses the kind of vows, particularly the Bodhisattva vows. And in doing so, you continuously accumulate non-virtue.
Oya, tako nipa tere do tate. Tate zhengli shubhe cheya, yagu cheche ko tichi ura tuku tangyo mara se tandara. Zhengli nebe rende la tenji kanga, saye tongye da chik tuzu kanga, chui kya da, dasha da tuzu kanga tenji, treku re se gora. Ti sholu ka sum songa dere do, ka se do se na. Zhengli chi se matang wa se. 전에 마당 봐도 대봐도 제게다 다샹게도 주다 고기하라 전게다 아니 추다 사다 동다 추게다 사동다 로 매라서 나게 있는 매라서 봐 덴베 대월에 끼스고 정간 대지는 가이나 또 부셔지 따기요 말에 나는 매라서 보다 어떠주 간 같은지 자고 레스도 어디 랍산 되겠어라.
So then the second point under this is that as long as they are held within prison, prisoners should be made comfortable. They should be given decent conditions. So it says in verse 335, and until they are released, those prisoners should be made content by providing them with barbers, baths, food, drink, clothing, and medical care. So you shouldn't sort of hold prisoners and make them miserable through things like withholding food and water or not giving them sort of services like being able to wash themselves, being able to have their hair cut and giving them medicine and so forth.
Oh yeah, 다들 또 버릇이 거기도 야, 어래 다들에 내매 바에 부다라 너도 로아 샹데 따르 왜냐 그러시네 닝지 예네 철제 자에 다에 마이 뇌셔 미셔라 오 되네 telea 가르쳐도서나 동행께배시도 어느 그 도박 고겨라 정을 송해 고란데 그 도부당에 돈다를 송아 마르베시고라 그 잠만 주고 시자 콜 동해 제바 가시도 정을 주고 마르베시고라 동행께배시도 송아 많이 남세 대화를 지나서 그 정을 주되 대화를 하고요나 니 전에 송네 가르쳐 그래 요शा는 저기 와서고라 대화를 지다 지시르네 진냠나세 전바 심제 전을 주고 하면 도와서고라 미릭바 제바 너도 알아 미릭바 제바 너도 매바 부달라 밤에 자마인 바 처미기 자 챙겨도 밤에나 수수 부들라 도스티파 뒤딩마 소세 제바를 접든데 시에요래 등내데 짜와게 그 유라지 지나 삼개월마도 그 너밖에도 개요 말와 얘네 내 겁든데 시고 연구가 돼서 어디나 시리에서 와라 미륵 바치베 너도 메로 부달라 밤에 너론도 잡아치 너도 롱아 야부치 줄주다야치도 네 되베 살주바 니지 꾸넬라네 또서 그 제바제 니지 꾸넬라네 그 야부치 차나삼 딘데 삼루 토네시 요레서라 넘네네 살제바라 살제바 자에 시다 마일라스 콘도체네 코티 지마르세 바 콘도 사도체네 사가 쿠이체레 제마도 땡네 콘도 마사티르세 오라 non-degeneration sarchebacho mai no se oya chala rabtinde ko sene ko eta tinde chedo chole so tinde mare sigora o tijulamna divide
And then next, there's sort of a doubt that might arise. Like someone might think, well, isn't it the case that putting someone in prison is to kind of make them miserable, to punish them? And so if you aren't going to do that, then why wouldn't you just sort of cast them aside? Isn't the reason to put them in prison to inflict some kind of punishment? And so here in verse 336, it reads, as if you have the intention of making unruly children behave properly, you should discipline them out of compassion, not out of anger or the desire for material gain. So there are times like when parents need to reprimand their children, but they don't do that out of a kind of wish to inflict harm. They don't do it out of anger or the wish for some kind of material gain, but it is for the purpose of reformation, to be able to make them better, to improve them. So here too, with regard to prisoners, one should have the kind of attitude of not inflicting punishment in order to make them miserable and out of anger or hatred or out of a desire for some kind of material gain, but rather with the purpose of reforming them.
오야 가데르다 가서 rabdan söber chebe misido rabdan söber chebe metade legbar shekines 다 미럽든데 세세 고자를 접진데 접진신게 지내로 콜레 딱셔야 보시시고라 다들 레버 시키네 다고 마음보다 주로 친도 친매도 로사레도 로사메도 텐데 딱셔야 보시고 레서라 미세네바 미지와르사 메네 콜 미생게 이나고 네바 마셔서 콜야 네바 마셔봐 유네 tre바 다도스 다 롱바 디나를 콘도 베네 짜르라 잡지 테메테네 테고 롱바 셴달파 비구레스고라 경비다서 베베네 네마 별로서 텐데도가 지나고 잡지 전에 롱바 셴다서 당시에 코티네 영속마 롱바 디날 때고래 소하게 오면서 그 매주 사바를 지내야 공에만 하시 지방에 버시 토이서 말아 근데 경비당 그랬어 장아령 불려와
So then this next point is that if those prisoners that are not reformable, you should banish them from the country. So here in verse 337, it says, particularly with regard to hateful murderers, having properly examined and identified, you should send them into exile without killing or harming them. So you should analyze well, is this person someone who can be reformed? And if they are not able to be reformed, you shouldn't harm them, you shouldn't kill them, but instead, if they are going to fight, if they are going to cause trouble in the environment that they are in, then you should expel them, exile them into another country. So this used to be the kind of practice in Tibet. If someone was deemed to be unreformable, they were just going to continue their old ways in that environment, then you send them far away where they have to stay and are not allowed to return. And maybe in that new environment, they won't be able to get up to their old ways.
뭐야, 다들 것도 잘하시니부터 니바 최응아르메 사도 주발을 라바서도 최응아르메 바사도 주발을 라고 그래 사반데르들 제고를 해서신다. 근데 최민바 가고 와서 최마인바 제가 주바 가고 쳐. 다 당불이야 컨디션은 최응아르메 주발이야. 근데 니도와 샤마타 개발체 자와다 대표 소바르부터 샤체 소반다부터 샤체 따도 생겼다. 근데 샤한테 따고 빼체 니셰도 다 당부들에 라와 여바 유군야서로 라와 여바 유군야 자마다이 젠지 식 아니 따도 바에 전대버 최다 준비 단저지세 다들 가르치도스나 잡았을로 라와 여바를 자외치도 개부 땅와 메시바 개부 고랑게 땅에 뭐 소바시거라 다티 소바이 바하마고 개부 미 바하마고 쳐거라 개부 땅와 메시바 아니 소바들시도 초단에 초가스갈 바다네 다도 휴식해서 건조 지조나 가르치기도 따지고 그래서 유권야 자마다이 젠지 식바 다도 바위다 잡아다 잡아 쳐다 준비 된 저지에서 최만이 받아 진요다다 진짜 누면도 따야려 소바만 보샤고 그래서 그래 신 자와 멤버 제바 본신스 자와 많이 봐 취미 지조나 된자 매봐 진짜 있는 파티 매봐 소거라 바위다 담발라 공배 던지 상마 바위바 야구제 행자부 시디체 내 돈다랴 다도체는 소바만 못하고 그래서 진짜래 야 말로 좀 연대내라 다니게 어디 알레 되실랍나 담마 되시라
So then next we get to a new topic, which is training in those practices or dharmas that have not been previously accomplished. And this has accomplishing the dharma and stopping that which is non-dharmic. And so the first of those is sending out, one could say, representatives or sort of agents to keep an eye on things throughout one's land. So here it says then in 338, independently survey all lands through the eyes of agents, always vigilant and mindful to do what should be done in accord with the Dharma. So in order to preserve one's autonomy or freedom, the sort of places of where you might not know what is going on, you should make sure that there are agents or emissaries that are sent out kind of in a secret way to keep an eye on what is happening, and particularly to look out for those things that are non-dharmic, always having, as it says here, being vigilant and mindful in order to make sure that there's sort of harmony. If there's a place particularly with non-dharmic activities or things where it's maybe non-harmonious, to preserve the kind of peace and happiness, well-being of the area, one should send out those kinds of agents.
yeah. That did it. So, some sort of Yundanella, Tani Geshe, Yunde Chimbu Yungenge, or Mita, Chunde Tesura Sigara, and Gavukora Gichone, Gudita Chitazu, Robacheta, Tesu Cheton Chivore, Sember. Yundanella Tani Ge, Rabchi Kuti, Rimbuta, Chimbapua, Sopenjo, Robacheco, that in the ene ba shepsi abu shivu de se war pendo abu shivu de se rimduta kachi jesu tenja se kachimbu shivu de se lama namla chiri kese tetan tawa chizo na mishenda la yako kuran chibe chana ma roba che kuya kari na tinte ti chiri pa dagi dagi che roba che gu de se ya ti chi lamna digito ati.
So then the next verse is in the same topic that says, through extensive and suitable generosity, respect, and service, devote yourself always to those who are the foundation of good qualities. Do the same for the rest as is appropriate. So one should serve those who are doing benefit or doing good extensively. You should try to, again, through extensive and suitable generosity, engage in particularly devoting yourself to those who are of qualities, and offer them respect and service, and do for others, even if they don't have such great qualities, do for others, engage in generosity and so forth as is appropriate, whatever help one thinks is suitable to give.
Oh yeah, talk about this. What did I thought? Look, I ship you there. Gabo, Chinshi, so tips your own better. That Gabo was to Kikasora, Kibuche Tessa to the method to the Yabu settle says. Gabo Chinshi, and then so tips your Shibuche Tessa to the good method, get your was. Oh, Nico. Consulia Yabu Gabo Ya Chido Medo Dumbrella Sobatinde Yabu Sura Tessa. And Rabji Debu Chende Lase. Oh, and Mangi Chanam Temperature. That is a Tamadala Sobasha, the Penikabu Tessa, to Jindam Tessa today in Ako. Mangi Jasut in the Kabu to Batato Senge, Sobasha could do us. Tinashi Kasaka Sobasha could say, Titanda, Tidoa. Oh, Tichilamna, Timetra.
So then here, the next verse is 340, which is where I believe we actually had left off last time. And so here it says, and I think this is giving an example that says, if the tree of kingship offers the shade of tolerance, the open flowers of respect, and the great fruit of generosity, then the birds, your subjects, will flock to it. So here, Geshe is saying that it also is sort of like sending out agents when you have that kind of eye on what is happening within the kingship, then it can be something that offers the kind of shade of tolerance, these open flowers of respect, and the great fruits of generosity.
Oh, yeah. Nature. Oh, that. Gaboton and Majuchan said, Gaboton and Majuchan. Pass Chimbaton and the Sobatis and Majuchan. And Chidan Demba, Shijidan Dana, Gajute. Sumi Nale Shatube Shakara Lotushes. That is Mashitish Lotion. Gabolia, Neton and Majuchan in Asra. Nieba Mesube Sardan Dana. Jungse Toyanko. That Gabu Chidanda ko Saba Kongo Dana, go best of Chinda today in the Tozuko, Toya Chutana, do this, but Namju that thing they could turn Chiata Yomarte. Toya Chutana, do this, or Mesube Mardan Dana, or Jungse Toyanko, what you this. Benase, that they chan said, Samsania Tozuko, Tona Shitanko today with the rich and thank you, this, Benase, that's something they could pencil matter, there's some chunk you are Marisora. Bena, the pitch and the size to Tungmin Nalisha se ta sayari se ra chilo de pa zubu che sangsing yusara zubu rere yusara o yona ya ko nalo sana ya na ko nalo la shimbu yusara o tina shi pechan she do zube pa cha ko se re shawa latu se de saya che se do kya latu shin 냐나 신부이나야 칠월과 주부럽지 사마테테르체 나나로 사네 신부여가 디나시 친 남주래야 또고 콘도 예배 취때나야 셈테네고 콘도 체체 근데 참지요 말이셔야 돼도 야 디실라나
So the next in 341, it sort of is preceded by this question. Is it enough to just be patient? And here it responds, a munificent but majestic king will be beloved like a sugar candy with a hard crust made from cardamom and black pepper. So here it is important for a king to be patient, but there are those times where it's maybe appropriate for him to show a little bit of anger, a little bit of wrath, we could say. It's not as though the king is actually angry in his heart, but rather that kind of, when a king is able to be generous and giving to his subjects, but also sometimes show maybe a little bit of sternness, we could say, then this is sort of like a candy, a sweet, wherein the outside is sort of crusty or hard, but really there's sweetness inside. And so in the heart of a king, in the depths of their heart, there's nothing but a wish to benefit. But sometimes they might give the appearance of being a little bit of stern or a little bit wrathful. And this is kind of like a candy with a hard crust.
Oh yeah. 자 대다르 주 그래 대다르 베체나 니스로 어떤데 제바체네 야 우체 따기 되게 제로 소바샤야 다트즈가나 근데 제나스 뭐라 대다 리베 제나네세 남주 리베 삼루 땅기 강커버 따기 되게 köge kesi ngome yun keran kesi di nyamgi marese shendu pemba to tucha tinde chag marese ora rigba mai kashe rigba mai minjur sha rigba mai ba de mirigba njug marese yaguche kesi kanto rese chimi mai choso kesi kanya de kana chö memba dikpa san maumba na takin sana shengazo Nima kebu de coração na brasa ache koti yabu wanju che chungara kewa chen chungara ta tanda de koti kiwen rebu de mege wa chungya chena chima ni so so tu dra nyanga yora yanga kewa chen tinde chungate tanda ya ko kewa chen ya dra saml ta ku ma to ti yabu che ma che tikbe ngo jurchuna nima so nam sa wa de tare ma tur ta ya sal do sha ra o disu te da rigbe chena ni kye kesi go minjur shendo yabu me chau mari sora rigba mai minjur shese ke si chuda tumba rigba ta chuda tumba mai ba jurga mari sere chimi mai choso jur che mai ba jurga mari se chuda tumba shene ke si changba de kyawa de gre se gora ne ma hon ba na tele ja la ba yo ya kiti jora ti ma do ngama yabu kyawa sa Titi yabu chi pencho ta tezu kanga pusun soba chung. Ti tari pecho lokpa ta na chima ya. Tila ma tur ndra kulu chena ma di ra. O ti sungda. Tika digme do. Ngar sheba ta rikpe chena kyo ki kesi. Go ba ta nyambar menjuru la ase. Rikpa mimba randi ugu ma re. Che mimba ma imba. Che sun jura chawas. Tunda tira kyawa ne kyawa se de ngama ne yabu che tin rebu ti. Tila yaar ta ya tapsi che ur ma to. Ngama yabu cheben rebuti rang tur tai kyulen roa chana mandi ra o tisikda ya o tiskuna ndi
So in 342, it then reads, from reigning properly in this way, your kingdom will not be chaotic. It will not proceed improperly nor contradict the Dharma. It will be in harmony with the Dharma. So here it is incumbent upon the king to examine well, and having examined well what is proper and not, what is necessary and not, they implement their sort of kingly rule. And so one should use use this kind of authority and power that one has as a king in order to create the conditions to have good results again in the future. As we were talking about with the introduction, that while we have a good situation, we shouldn't use it for negativity. It's totally unsuitable for a king to take the kind of position that he has that was attained on the basis of accumulating merit, on much virtue accumulated in the past, and use that in bad ways that will lead to a bad kind of rebirth, or using this for a non-dharmic kind of purpose. And so if you proceed properly, reigning properly by examining what should and shouldn't be done, what is necessary and not, then it is the case that the kingship will proceed in a harmony with the Dharma. It's not going to contradict or proceed improperly.
Oh, yeah. 다들 갈 수도 있어. 어래. 소재 손에 그래 계시기 동에
Genlandi, gyasi jikten parone,
아
uh,
계시 지대
Chilasha.
바로네.
Yeah. Oh.
계시 지대 바로네 남대 어디래. 계시 지대 바로네 남대 코라기 개베시 디시오라 네루론조라 소바 푸숨 소바 데시오라 지대 바로네 남대 좀바 남민주르세 지대 교가만에 수키오네 데케오바케 마레시오라 단다 여버테 마옴바레 교치말 키드라케 오 마레시오라 계시 지대 바로네 남대 마제세 그런 키오바 마레시오라 남 민주르서 마음바나 단다 계시디 교치만 봐 키드라케 오 마레시오라 남 민주르스 최진예바 데레도세 최진예베 데레도세 최단 템바 계시디 야고시 장바이나 대시도 취미교제 기미레세 아마 야고지 가서래 계시디 야 단다 야고니에바데 최진예베 계시 필수소바니에 되게마 최지체네 딘데블체네 용교하래서라 최진예베 데레도 취미교제 최신행에마 최기원 제부들에 단다 대수 필수소 청으래서라 다티 최단 틈바지 마셔나 미틈바지 제라니 최민발이 주도요라 취미교제 기미릭사 최민바 계시디 최마이바 쳐라 기와레기 말해서도 진짜도 배신들이 개부 교제 계신 지대 바로네 남들 페바 말해서라 양지대 바로도 남민주세 마오바나 키드라케 요 말해서라 최기 님베 계시대 데레도 취미 교제 기미리서 되래 최라테네 중에 계시대 표준 소바데 단다 최마인발 교주요 말해서 대체다 틈바신 다다 마오바 야드에 삼을당고마도 최기 토베 계시대 최마인발 제는 마오바라 투분요에 단다 교나 만디레셔 야데도.
So then next in verse 343, this is stopping that which is not dharmic. And so it says here, you have not brought your kingdom with you from the previous life, nor will you bring it to the next. You obtained it through dharma, so it is not right to violate the dharma for its sake. So here it is the case that the sort of abode, the body, the possessions that one has as a king, they didn't come, like you didn't carry them from a previous life, and nor is it the case that a king is able to carry those with you into the future. But rather it is the case that such authority, this kind of kingship, was obtained through the Dharma, through doing various, in the past, having done various virtuous actions that that resulted in this kind of life as a king. So this excellent result came about due to those kinds of positive dharmic actions of the past. And so therefore, you obtained it through the Dharma, so it is not right to violate the Dharma for its sake. It's not right to use the authority, the kingship that one has, in order to do things that are against the Dharma. Again, this is something that came about from good results, and one should use in order to ensure good results in the future. So it's not logical or right to use this thing that came from the Dharma in order to do non-dharmic activities.
Oh, yeah. That cable China song to Atanda. In a Marazo Kanga Koku, Rasos cable. Kyongama take lay Yabusa, Milu Yabuchi top. Roa Penjo of Chine Kaya Yako Pony, Siame Toya Metendeke Marwa. Ti Yanako Ditsara, Penjoko, Lutsotayate, Lutsoya Tante, Asada Kanga de ora, Timado Koyachi Keomara. Sergi Kambachina Tena Hale Keomara, Chipa Yugachita. Saba Sishangajin Tichibara, Yake Omara, Tasabe Kerisira. Kinko Kyongama Le Sambusa, Militi Tanda, Luda, Lonche, that Sama Yatachiskera. Tating Azuchima Mahobana, Titu Jajin, Neson Madragi, Chawatri, Tanda Tanshana Madira. Tanda Kabul Sacha, Madota, so Garazukanga Chibara. Nama Kewasani Abuchumate, Yaya Kewasani Yarta Matuna. 야 도르다는 개와사ben 데부터 배치는 마 도르다나 틀랭에만에 돈주를 시키다는 것 돈주는 대대는 시라티고 사야게 요마라 삽침부민의 시사가 말아 말아서 tren지 사우지 삼로 tren지인데 망사야 내가 요라 어디 가서 개부 사지 모두 소소소래 고고야라 어야 되질라나
So here, this is advice that is for a king, but this is also advice to us. We here who are listening, we have enough, right? We aren't totally bereft of possessions. We aren't starving or in need, but rather we have enough. And that is something that resulted from our doing virtues in the past. And we should use then what we have in terms of our body, our abode, our possessions to ensure that we have good again in the future. We shouldn't sort of squander them in things like rather than recognizing we have enough, deciding we need a golden palace or something. But we should use the kind of situation that we have now in order to ensure that we have something good again in the future. This is really important. It's not just advice for a king, but it is really advice for us all. And so if we are, if we are an animal, for example, animals typically don't do really heinous, non-virtuous actions, right? They may do some things, but they're not capable of doing the kinds of non-virtues that humans are through our ways of thinking and acting. And so while we have attained this kind of life due to the good causes that we created in the past, we should use it for virtue, right? We shouldn't allow it to go towards something that is negative.
What do you 초제 손에 계시게 오라 다들 초제 손에 계시게 초제 손에 계시게 중에 초제 규바다 진에 두바를 민교로 개부터다 nenden수스다 어디 갈수도서나 야 고사 녀에서 소소로 고야게 준내 르론지 가리나 고체투선 여행에서 오라 넘치자 그렇죠. 그거 이거 잘라녀. 그렇잖아요. 초제기 손에서 저걸 거야게 손 잘라도 주시거라. 손에 레나한테 잘라 사야 통해서 야구 주는 거 대회께 줄도 그래서 아니 야구 많이 내고야 동해 집에 담아줘 요에 줄도 그래서 내나 동해 집에서 계시 취게 마소나 계시냐 최다 템버처 마소나 아니 치마 계시를 통해 계획 줄도 그래서 와라 계시 계시 취기소나 계시기 치만 제부 아니 가서래 동해에 초시 규바다 계시 취기 마소나 이게와 치마래 계시들은 제부 동해에 줄도 그래서라 계시 치만 제부 동해 초바 초계획 줄도 그래서 규바다 진에 어디선가 꼭 계시되 진에게 겨치마 동해녀의 귤은 민주와 대화 부숨 소바 토의 귤은 주와 개부처럼 제고를 해서거라. 신의 두번 민주와 개부 추진된 저스 디베신 디메를 담아대. 소재 손의 계시 계시도 동해 소재 규바다세 신의 두번 민주로 개부 대단된 저스 어디지 람나야 됐어.
So then next, it says, King, through your efforts, see to it that you do not end up perpetuating the stockpiling of suffering through your kingship's stockpiles. So here, a king possesses all kinds of necessities, right? Those things that support life. And if used properly, they can be the support for our virtuous actions. But if you don't use them well in accordance with the Dharma, then those kinds of stockpiles, all the possessions, again, a king has inherited this kind of abode and body possessions due to virtue in the past. But if they are used in a way that is not according to the Dharma, not in accord with the Dharma, then basically what they are doing is stockpiling suffering in the future. So the possessions, the kind of requisites and necessities that a king possesses should not be used. They should really make an effort not to use those to become a cause of future suffering, to become the stockpiling of suffering in the future.
뭐야, 당한 주대 딜레도아 subject 숨부시도 담아요. 그 가시도서 타르바 톱진 택바 쳔베 되네 매봉을 라바서도 고에 동엘에 타르바 톱바 제고르서 되네 택바 쳔베 되네 데 뽕고 말으서 택바 쳔베 되네 빵고 말 택바 쳔베 람냠살랑 고르서 다야 택바 쳔베 산지 쳐 많이 셔로 되네 요아요라 되지 숨겨라 숨바 타르바 톱진에서 택바 쳔베 되네 매봉을 라바서 택바 쳔베도 산지 까 말으서 때 산지 송요 말으서 되려라 어떤들 택바 쳔베 쳐도 빠져요 말으서 산지 송요 말으서 산지 용자체 송요서 말아 대산에 생각도 고치시에 가리네 퍼져도 가리 팽기네 내기네 가리네 캠에 가르소서 시기고 강게 시셔라 산지 그게 두제 감다 삼바 두제 시기를 쓰네 퀄리티 단다 시기면도 삼네 송요 말아 펜도 매게데 단다 코테 로처라 레메도삼 근데 택바 쳔부터 Thabkhe shen chebe se ti kandogera mi kangale sosole mission da Thabkhe chegurse non-degeneration mara tende ko chida soso zo chene tembe shi kone chuso koe dongele tare tiche koe dongele tare tiche kari lo pobarab chi lepsna o ta ene semje shendale samlu ta ti lapke ne to tichira tambu soso chanja modame ta shenda chi churse 미때 nga 풍사를 삼기라 매버서 nga 메시티 풍을 깨서를 삼기라 어떻게 초용다지 송구에서 말아 뒤에 택바서 부산에 까마리세 마부 뉴런 투체토를 송기와라 어때 날씨 동반이에 가셔를 송기와라 가셔를 송기와 말아 가셔를 동반이 녹조 송기와라 부부간에 쿠르 코코만 가사고 가사 다 요르 다스 나로 땡게 다 요르 다스셔네 야가르 줘 가셔 nga yore nga tunga nyo chi chana nga dik marisam jikta di sanje ki tungi sa yungudu kadam bela mangashi jikta di kubi yore cho chana pen to yore nga samsa rao chi ta nga chi chana dik marisam ne iko ti simshu kena nga tunga nyo na dik mar nga chi chana dik marisam to sa yang cho chana pen to yungu yore cho chana ko nga sa nga zi shuk chida chun migi le sa ti chi yore ti so ra jika to sa nga zi de shukchenpo kaşalaya ta ye masonga ta yore sungara kaşali ta ye me le jagyo mare ye sena mare me sena mare kol karchena ye sena ne ta de yangja pe do sarasa me sena ne ko rawe ta yo mare chi yore se ye wa che ko ne ko lo le chu ma do na ta me se do ke me do samsa che da lu nyanga yora te ye de ka ke masong le ma jo yore 요 지된 제바보다 다다 뜻을야 참살을 내경도 다 치료받도 산재가 다 유명 내경요 말에 지된 제바보 유명 컨디션도 내경요 말에서 유명 가능성요 말에서 알았습니다. 뒤쪽엔 거실이야 유명 가능성요 말마다 지단코 유명 송요라. 야 어디 다가 스트레스 야 뒤질라나
Mm. So here the following verse is very similar in that it says, King, through your efforts to see to it that you manage to perpetuate your stockpiling of kingship through your kingship's stockpiles. So that goes with the one above. And then here we next turn to the next topic, which is then related to again, this is the kind of advice for achieving liberation and not forsaking the scriptures of the Mahayana. And so here, Buddhists, again, when it comes to the Mahayana, there are some, this is a teaching that advocates that we need to relinquish our self-cherishing in order to cherish other sentient beings. And for some disciples, this is like too much for them to bear. To have to give up that kind of self-interest immediately is not something that they can handle. And so in general, the Buddha taught the kind of teachings of the Four Noble Truths, that sort of tradition in which in order to be able to lead beings eventually to taking up that kind of Mahayana teaching, what was more widely taught was that of the sort of vehicle of individual liberation. If some disciples were taught immediately that they have to give up their self-interest, they might think, well, what a loss. That's going to ruin my life. And so we see that there arises then this kind of dispute over the Mahayana being the actual teaching of the Buddha, because the Buddha didn't teach it widely to everyone, recognizing that the teachings, it's best to only teach in accordance with the needs of beings. I mean, today we are a little bit different. We sort of teach whatever we put the Mahayana out there, but the Buddha taught specifically in accordance with the various dispositions, inclinations, and needs of his disciples. And so there's some times that he taught emptiness, but he didn't teach emptiness to everyone. Sometimes he taught the opposite of emptiness, like the sort of aggregates are this load that are borne by the self. And that was in order to lead those particular kinds of disciples who might fall into some kind of an extreme if they were to be taught selflessness or emptiness right from the beginning. So there are disciples to whom he did teach selflessness. There are some that he taught, oh, there is a self. And so there is actually a kind of saying that the sort of continuity of the Buddha is this view of the perishable collection, just in that it is based upon the recognition of a self, that some beings are able to pick up the practice of Dharma, as in engage in virtue and not engage in non-virtue because of their holding to that kind of a self. So in some ways that has helped to carry on the Buddha's teachings. There are times when the Buddha taught that there was a self or that there was not a self in accordance with the needs of disciples, and sometimes when he would not give an answer, because giving an answer would be detrimental in either way. So for some, if he was to say, yes, there is a self, that would reinforce their kind of grasping at a self, their view of there being a self, and they would fall into the extreme of permanence. Or if he were to say, oh no, there is no self, they would fall into an extreme of nihilism, thinking that there's nothing, no karma, cause and effect, and so forth. And so here, when we get into this section, which will be dealing with the kind of advice on achieving liberation and not forsaking the scriptures of the Mahayana, this is a little bit of a side comment, but the Buddha taught in accordance with the various needs of disciples. And so too, there are times when his teachings may seem contradictory, but it really has to do with the intended audience.
뭐야 다 뒤에가 좀 내고도 산재 쳐들이야 지단 미강가 그 팀모도 제 두드려 주 송요 말아 지단 쳐져나 그 강가게 지단 참마티 제지마도 담메담만 매베 셰시오라 근데 송요 말아 But make a chupa, Kawachu to city Janjas on the Shagmedwa. Tarwas Toba Tijanja Mashashi, till the Lodge Songora. So Kotos to come the Samba. Zambuling Menalia, Samula, Damada, come the Samba Damada Mamboyora. Tele Kadu Kadu, Sigi Sigina, do any teacher, Madame Medal, Chil Madame Meda Songo Yongora. Or T and do Nambetul Trandun and Yetus Mamboyora. To Yongoete. Me Samul and Damada Kashelik to Tanganzuke Haku Maro, Chidare. Sanje to come the Samba da Parlanes, Nime Pakshata, Tanda Samul called Kareshena, called Pendo Cheto, and Neck of Taro. Tartu Triset and that in a tick on Gashen, Lol Chutu Mara. As a Puchu Julia Chick, Tunda Chambutan, the Lamna Hakoto Mardo, okay, Hako Mara, Setatina Shimambudua. She said, Nezimone, Lolang the Chumadunga Mambuara, just ended the Kangal Sungshana, Digi Omato, Kolol Dagitagiche Songura. Then to teacher come the Samba the Palanian, Dagitagiche, and another church again at another Tambuda, Tepachimbo Yashude, Sanga Yashude, teacher Achara So some get church, the Cavado, Carita, do so Remba teacher, and Digi or Niji Miji, Tepachimbo the Sanga the Kanga Koeke Omara. Yendu Nashi Church, Tembashi, when the Samtana Digdwa. Oh, the Mandali Nako Kibuchungu Church, Samtana Shida, sometime. The Shish Temple Suna Shidara. I don't know that Kibuchung says a Chuju in something Tangmatas, Yandra, King of the Chihuahua Mata, or Tindu Karsoda. To say come the Samba the Palani and the Sinus I just choose on Guara. The Rangarazo around on the Samuel Pagbachigo, or Ting Alti Tata de Shatanda some teach Jenny Amuretua. Nazutime Toshe de Car, Yakshut Chivisigra. So Lord said the Yakshut live in Mena Kavaka Omar. To do some good work. Oh, Tis on the Sanjay, choose on the Kalon Dagam Canam, the subject of a session to Lepartala Songuatira. Nayaka Lorcha Christian me, Sanjay the Kushabi, Tabachan, Samake Malaya Songua. Can the Taxi is the social shiro de Peguyora. Sanjay Suya the Church, Madame Nambra Mambusura. Tezukanga Pendo Yore, Pendo Mavicamare. In a ribatolo de Mambuora, Kashil Tisamutana Pemba, Kashil Tisamutana Pemba de Yora, or Tin de Castle. Arazo Samluton Suete. Social Ripa to Dale. Oh, Karina, something de Samluchuna, Taxa Shetingura. Near Lavaganga Temperata, Temba is some Gorata, Masamna, Mantisona, and some Deneke Lopeke or Mara, Tata is a Yeshe. Soso Samlistana. So go the Resha wanted to Kuchi to Asamna, Autoga. And so some Latin at under Zacho Mososane, Shashanitira. Inji Miji, Nabechu Kelena, Tewachimbo Kelen, Sanga Kelen, Kanga Kelen, never go Mare. Kuatamna Mandira, Karina Tandanga Hakumese, Tishasha, not under the Insena, Digdua, Chezanko Karsura. Oh, King of the Hako. Sanjay Chandamada Mambu, Mambu, to the neck to the she, young. That's a Kashel Pajo, the son of the Pembiora. Kashel and daughter Basera. So, Lola Pagbachi, Cheque, Tondare, or here, yeah, what is you do it?
So, in general, the Buddha did not just teach one thing that is applicable generally to all, or that is going to be of benefit to all, because of the fact that beings have different kinds of dispositions, different inclinations, different imprints from the past. And so, really, the Buddha taught, everything the Buddha taught is of benefit, but he taught it in accordance with the various needs of disciples. So, for some, the most appropriate kind of teaching is about the 10 non-virtues and engaging in virtuous actions. For some, it's the idea of liberation from samsara. For some, it's the Mahayana and thinking about like equalizing and exchanging self and others. And so the reason for this, that we can't talk about like one single general teaching, is that the Buddha taught in accordance with disciples' needs, with the level of their mental capacity. And And so this is where we get into there being those kinds of scriptures that are provisional, that require interpretation, and those that are definitive. And so it's not as though we can say, well, in general, this is the teaching that you need, but it is something that needs to accord with the kind of imprints that you have, the kind of disposition that you have. Like if we were to try to tell a small child something really profound and a kind of high level, they won't be able to understand that. But rather, the Buddha taught by looking at the kind of dispositions. Oh, what are the imprints that this being has in their mind? What teaching will be of most benefit to them? And that is how he gave these teachings. And so often we don't do this for ourselves. We don't actually evaluate our own mental capacity or the level of our understanding. And we think like, oh, the Mahayana is best, the Vajrayana is best. I need to get to the thing that is best. Like, I don't want to look small by practicing the sort of teachings for the being of small scope. But often we sort of dismiss that in a way that we shouldn't. We should actually approach the teachings in a level that accords with our own consciousness, our own kind of mental capacity. And this is really important for us to do, as the famous verse wherein the Buddha said that you should examine my teachings in the way that you would examine gold, right? By cutting and burnishing it and so forth. And you shouldn't just accept it out of respect for me. And so the Buddha taught these various different things, and we actually need to use our own intellectual capacity, our own wisdom, in order to look at them, evaluate them, and see what accords with our mind, and actually use them use that kind of process in order to develop our wisdom. All of the teachings of the Buddha are something that are to be used to develop and increase our wisdom. They're not just to be accepted out of respect, and they're not just to be sort of like looked at as, oh, I want to go for the highest thing, I want to go for the best thing. But we need to think about our own kind of capacity, where our mind is at, and take up those teachings that best accord with that. And it's not definite that we need to accept all of them all at once. We don't need to accept the Mahayana or the Vajrayana right from the beginning. On the other hand, we don't want to disparage them or dismiss them, but we should think about the fact that all of these various teachings that the Buddha gave are for the benefit of sentient beings, but he gave varied teachings. The various tenant schools are described, and so some beings, maybe it is the mind-only presentation that best accords with their mind, or for some, the most benefit will come from approaching the Sautrantaka teachings and so forth. And we need to recognize both that the teachings of the Buddha were given for the varied minds of disciples, and we too should have the kind of ability to approach the teachings that best accord with our own mind in a way that increases and develops our own wisdom.
Oh yeah, that's the Sumba Tarva Tarva Topji Tekpa Chimbi Tene Mebon Labasoda. Tarva Topji Tekpa Chimbi Tene Pangi Omarese. Oh, Tene Tarve Tabla Labata. Teaching Tene Bon Akabasha, Tatambo, Ala Nis, Sibe Penzo, Soa Tidu Ranshinji Trubakawa. Tako Siba. Koraga ne lu lonju la soba tezu la seba la soba tewa da tunga nyoya mabuchi wardo. O tezu kanga tidu sete korang shinji chuwa yo ma reste. Sibe yu sora tidu rang shinji chuwa kawa. Tewa sete rang shinji chuwa chiwa mara susu samlu tancho mabu kewa dora. Tunga sete korang shinji chuwa chiwa mara. Chashe la tena le pa taane. Ji shakuya chire mato. Ko yido wansi namba tamji tsu yido wan kange tongkuya chi yo mara. Soso samba ke samlo tangda ke keba mabudu yordo. Tanya ji wangi shakwa, tokwe wangi shakwa. Yugi chashe mabu chi, entele tena soso le pa takzu ji keba ke wangi dhoya mabu yordo. O tende, tsoa tewa ta tunghe tuzu rangshin chi chuba. Tsoa tewa kiwe yu yido wansi rangshin chi chuba meba. Tsoa tunghe kiwe kyo yido me wansi rangshin chi chuba meba. Rwa, tambu tala ale soso, nga se kange tondo pe, ke chishu chisa nga kona rangshin chi chuba meba. Ene nga yi lu se te rangshin chi chuba meba. Ene nga lo koko tsangma. Rwa, ene mekwe ba tata neba chinge. O tezu tsangma rangshin chi chuba yo ma resi. 아주 단다 소소 삼을 나시 전부 따다 돼요 말. 소 삼을 땅땅이 개바치기 누구요래세 어디시게요라. 담불라 시베 초와 디두랑 신기 주바 까봐. 라. 택바 치중이가 동이죠. 택신다 택매니가를 동이 참고 또 거다. 년도랑 제도수이나 동반이 참고 또 그러마도 타르바 톱톱이요 말에. 다양한테 주다 신다시네 가시셔요 알아서. 단단히 우마바 시샤시셔요. 우마바 루시자잖아. 녀모 빵발에 동반이 참고 또 나마도 용구요 말아. 저 택매년도 이내다 랑제 이내다 동반이 또 구요래. 다 자주 심대요 말도. 딱배 신집에 자주 심대요 말아. 단다 소소 쪼르지 코에 동에게 순다르지. 나라시 타나 삼사시마도 탐제지다 삼로 코르토고요 말도. 이나 가지나 신텐데데레데 아마 고심제 체메벌미 텐데데 가침부터 요아리데. 전주 선반나시 메로. 대마도 동반이 또 베시르부터 직바 요아레서. 탑기자 딱배 신집에 자주 심비에만 개바요라 디지팅메냐. 저니까 담불섬 소아 대화랑 생기 주어요 말에 동해랑 신기 주어요 말에서 야 뒤지랑 만들어서 넣어서
So then we come next to a new topic, which is then achieving liberation and not forsaking or abandoning the scriptures of the great vehicle. And then first, again, this is divided into two topics, the first of which is training in the path for liberation. And this then begins with the refutation of inherently existent objects of attachment, pleasant and painful feelings, and so forth. And so here, when it comes to our kind of craving for samsara's pleasures, recognizing that it is not the case that the objects that we find attractive or pleasurable are actually inherently existent, nor are the feelings of pleasure, or in the case of unattractive objects, pain, that come from that inherently existent, but rather this depends upon our way of conceptually designating our mental processes that label something in dependence upon a collection of parts. We think, oh, this is pleasurable, or oh, this is painful, and so forth. And this is designated by terms and by thoughts. And so those objects of our pleasure or our pain are not inherently existent. And so that is the first of these, is a refutation of the inherent existence of pleasure and pain, as well as the objects of our craving. And so all beings, first we have this kind of thought of I. We hold to this I really strongly, and then we think that there's an inherently existent mind, my body, and my possessions, and so forth. And so too with those objects of our aversion. But it is not the case that they are inherently existent as such, but rather this is due to our mental labeling, our mental designation. And so that is going to be addressed in the first topic. And then secondly is that both vehicles, the greater and lesser vehicles, are equal in having to realize subtle emptiness. So here, this is a presentation based upon the Madhyamaka, or the proponents of the middle way, who would assert that in order to be able to abandon the afflictions, one has to realize subtle emptiness. And so the difference comes in terms of an attitude of bodhicitta, that sort of bodhicitta that exchanges self-cherishing for cherishing of others, and in terms of the method side of the path. But when it comes to the kind of realization that is able to get rid of the afflictions, to get one out of samsara, it is equal for both those that are on the vehicle of individual liberation, as well as those pursuing the Mahayana, necessarily need to realize this subtle emptiness.
뭐야 그 말로서 다들도 링시바의 사톱자사 콜레교에 대화내서 류지 다도 sem기당 드니 코너를 세번도서 다 가르쳐도서는 개버주 링시바 톱자서 링시로 왕개다 개버님mel로서 전에 콜레교에 개버서를 된다요도 개버주지 링시바 톱자서 콜레교에 개버전에 류지 소라 대화다 Simgi Tawada, Tini Konar Sebar, Dola Ase, Samur Chil Gyursenase, that is our Tangusera. Luigi Sora Tawane, Tunge, Church, Luigi Soa Tawane, Tunge Chirna, Shomatsams, Luigi Soa Tawane, Tunge Chirna, Shomatsam. Simgi Dushi Ranshite, Togbe Cheva Konar Se, Satati Karsidosana. Tsoa tidu nidi rangshin ji chua mewa si shegi wara she. Liu ji tsoa dewa ne, dungi chiri chua ba tsam desa. Liu ji tsoa dewa se de nga zu kuya dewa de, suso kange chi yu, titi me na samsara tendi, o ti chane ane ti kange di tendi de, ko tewe ndushi chigi wara che ra. Samle chi sam ti chuna se titi samde, titi chunsa ane ko tsoa dewa tsoa chigi wara ma to, ko rangsenpa zi ngone rangsenpa chi ke yo ma. Rangsenpa zi rang chengi chuba kashal si yo ma da. Tawa ngone chi yo na ko ti takpa taka te kore de ti tegi yo ma rwa. Tangpo de chi chi chungsu na, oh, ta yapu chungsam tsuwa tewa nyo de. Ta ina ti kyun tu su na, tewa tegi ma rwa. Rangsenpa ina ti kyu jin ti taka taka te na, tsuwa di taka te kore rwa. Tsuwa de kyu tangpo kari na ti taka taka te na, ti te dewa dewa te tegi omara, parushi yadu ke nime kyujin kaka tsana ko tewe lo chigi omara, o chezan tisi wara. Tsoa dewa ne tunge chircho ba tsamto sede se. Tante sheba da tuzunal mambu yungu ba. Pena miji tokche ribichi ki chen chwara, chala mambu ki. Daga ine pungpe kwa dhukudu, shagdo, kashe kwa shagdo, pungpe kwa ki. Tai ko kale shira ka de kidera, baba ine ta gyablo kidera. Kale shira ka chi chende nasa tante, te a cha che te chu sha re shira. Shatu san pocho de, te wara si kidera, a ta yabu chung sung san. Yabu chung ya chi kaya ma, di tungen di pa jam zang, kangen di pa jam zang, ta te we lo che vre. Te ma to ko yang to tsu dana yang te go chu sa re, tungen go chu sa re si go re. O tina shi. Yachi lamga dachi do kale kada chi tosi nge su chamna dewe soa yungore, tegi kale kawa ti si. Tegi ngone dewa yene ko kaze dena tangpo dewa na si yungore ti yuwa mara, paru chi ya langi chone, takira ya langu mara desi ni chazu chi ko kale surkira, ya langi ya ka yora. O tina si. Soa kange ribichi chi yu, titi mewa chasu na, tila dewa lomba si gara, lomba. 소소가 어디야 붙여서 대화 sur게 와라. 오늘 대화에는 대화랑 셈바시나 규진데 다가 되는 대화랑 자 대그리 대그 말아. 버르지 예도라. 그래서 맹가라 지치 나는 시다나. 다이 매네 자이 수요네. 다이네 신다 깨게 매네 소부터 탄다지 되는 저기도 좀 뺏기부여라니 막 하시죠. 아 배워다 소부 탄다이네 신다 깨 매네 매사. Tati sanyi na nima chingi chingi cheru do. Shengu ne shene te chikpa yora, menga le tarre, ti te wara, senpo ene taga te yora, kyujin taga yora, ko ke te yora mara. O te so yora. Kasi so se na, kawa le so. Ore. Luigi tsoa te wane tunge shirchu ba tsam te se. Tunge shuk chunguru songwe nega buki tsoa te simba se. Tunge to chunguru te tayabu chung song sang. Tsoa simba nyoa se ra. Dewa rang simba maa re se kwa ra. Ngune dewa ke maa. Ngune dewa yene ti tangpo na shi dewa kyu di tsane taga dewa kore ti dewa me doa se. Susu simki samlo tangza chi lombe dewa re che re. Tunge chung se chunguru songwe negam na tsoa simba te dewa rang simba rāngsāmbā rā shimbā yīngi, tōwa ngōne rē sām shimbā yīngi mā rē chē rā. Tōngyē chīrchū yī tēwā sām dō tōkwa, jīdēn nā tōngyē rāngsāmbā yī yā, tēwā rāngsāmbā chūngsē kē mē tā. Tātī Tanya Tiro Kase. Ah, Sasa, oh yeah. Tunge de Ransa by Orishera.
Mhm.
Teote Ransa Gona Yomar, Takoana. Tunge de Garas and Goras Nagin, God and Nana Pato Tunge Degra. Tunge Judy Tede Pato Tunge Degiora. Teve Judagin Lomia de Te Judy Tede Pato Teo Degiomare. Sant Koalia Tunge de Tunge Mone Resha Sera. Tunge Judy Tes and the Tunge Terra Tegiora. Tewa de te lomba samre mato, kange chi yo ne te maa shiru de ne so sembi samul taja chire mato, ti tewa rang semba maa re shere. O te chilam na, ane drin shere, sanduwa.
Mhm.
O ya.
So then moving into laying out the connection between these topics, and there's various topic headings. Again, we can look at Jeffrey's book for that. But here it says in verse 346, even after a wheel-turning monarch attains governance over the whole world with its 4 continents, and again, this wheel-turning monarch idea is something sort of the past, but then it says, pleasure for him is still considered to be only twofold, physical and mental. And so here, when it comes to, even if someone has attained that kind of authority over all of the 4 continents, and as a wheel turning king, even that pleasure, for them, there are only these 2 pleasure, they're only twofold pleasure, physical and mental. And then examining the nature of that pleasure, it comes next in the verse 347, wherein it says, a pleasurable physical sensation is just comparatively less pain. Mental pleasure by nature and attitude is just conceptually created. And so we'll primarily be dealing with the first half of that verse, wherein it says, that it's not as though there is samsaric happiness is really not in by its nature or like characterized by being real happiness, but rather when one has the alleviation of some kind of suffering, you designate that as being happiness, right? It's not as though it's actually intrinsically existent as happiness. It doesn't continually bring happiness. So like, for example, if it were the case that it were actual happiness, then it would have to sort of continue for as long as the causes are complete. But rather, we can see through examples that happiness is really that which is just an alleviation of a suffering. Like, for example, in Tibet, they used to carry things on their back. In India, sometimes it's like on your shoulders or even on your head. And if you're carrying something for a really long time and then you set that down, it feels like, oh, this is happiness, this is pleasure. But after some time, that itself is not going to feel like pleasure, right? If it were the case that, say, after you've been walking for a really long time and sitting down, staying for a little bit to relieve the suffering of that continuous going, if that were actually really happiness, then as long as you stayed there, you should increase your happiness more and more, or experience that kind of happiness continuously. But we know that's not the case. After some point, you're going to get sick of staying there. That's not going to feel pleasurable anymore. Now you want to get up and get going again. And so it comes to this kind of the fact that we inflate, or we can sort of elaborate things as being happiness, and it's not the case that they have any kind of intrinsic nature of happiness. It's not the case that however long you experience those causes, they are going to increase, or you're going to even feel a sense of that being happiness. Like, for example, if you were in the hospital and you were sick and you get out of the hospital and you're like, oh yes, I'm well, I feel so great. It's not like that feeling remains forever. After a few days, you totally forget that. You have other kinds of suffering, even if the same sort of causes and conditions are complete. And so it is the case that a slight reduction, particularly in our physical suffering, makes us think, oh, this is happy, this is pleasurable, this is happiness. But it's really just a kind of mental inflation. We're due to our way of thinking. And on the other hand, and suffering is actual real suffering, right? So for as long as we have a headache, that's a headache. Our head hurts. We are experiencing suffering. So real suffering is something that is there within samsara, not truly existent, but it has this kind of character of it really is suffering. However long the causes that led to that remain, we are going to experience suffering, whereas happiness is not the same. It's not the case that as long as those kinds of causes and conditions are complete, we are going to experience something that is happiness. It's rather just merely an alleviation of a suffering that we had been experiencing before.
Yeah, that is awesome.
So the time is up for today, so we will leave it there.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Thank you, Genla. It's such a joy to be with you and receiving your teachings again. And thank you, Katrina, for your very clear translations. We'll finish our class today with some dedication prayers.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their past actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lobsang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Gururana Mandalakam Niryataya. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May the born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
두째나 겐라 다 양결 숭저 녀야 디 배 가보 중송스.
Yeah, oil. Oh, Dharma to share.
Thank you, everybody.
Mm.
Recording